I like that. A true professional. Overqualified to be on my show. Beto Duran, one of the nicest people. You seem like a genuinely nice person on telecast. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you, man. I'm glad to be on. What took you so long?
Sheer laziness and incompetence would probably be the easiest answers.
Oh, besides that, you're good.
Yeah, I mean, I think if honesty was like a deciding factor, I'd be pretty good at things.
Ah, there you go.
So you do a lot of like these club show things. And I was thinking real deep while I was drinking last night, and some of the most powerful and impactful people to my life kind of don't impact the world, but you kind of try to bring them with you along that journey, or at least I think I do. Like I think back to being 15 and all of that, and you try to take lived experience and maybe have something that makes meaning to other people, and you feel like they live on. I feel like you cover a lot of club shows. I didn't want to give you an allegory to start out, but I feel like a lot of club shows, oftentimes people set out with lofty goals. They want to be a world champion, yet a world champion is like being an all-star in the NBA. Not everyone gets to be that, and the fans aren't always understanding. You come off as I said before at the top of the show, a very nice person. How do you enter into calling like undercards and club show events with the dynamic of those events?
Because I love what I do. It's simple as that. It's not like a cheesy, like, oh, line or anything like that. I really do love what I get to do. And I recently celebrated my 8th year announcing boxing. And I didn't realize that until the picture popped up. And, I've done a lot of the big shows. I've done, stuff in Vegas. I've done stuff all over the world. It's been amazing. It's fantastic. And I take the same energy that I would if I was having a Canelo Triple G show that's available online, or if it's the first fight of a 4-rounder at the Thompson show at the Doubletree in Ontario with, 100 people that's related to the fighter. The reason is because as a broadcaster, you have to bring the same amount of professionalism. And if you sound like you don't want to be there, well, why would the audience want to be there? And with the sport of boxing, it's different because whoever is crazy enough to get into the ring on purpose deserves the respect. And I've never been in the ring. I'm not even, there's no chance whatever do that. And if you're 4 and 15 and you're getting in the ring at the age of 35 to help feed your family, you deserve some respect. I've heard of too many broadcasts, and not just in boxing, but in all sports, where you're watching and you're like, well, if you don't want to be there, why are you there? Like, these jobs are hard to get. There aren't many of them. So I still do high school games now, and I've covered every single major sporting event because my background is a radio reporter here in LA. I do some TV stuff and all that other. And I still get excited walking into the Doubletree in Ontario and seeing Mr. Thompson from Thompson Boxing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you see a big smile on his face. And I don't know the details of how the business works, but he's probably losing money on these club shows, right? I think club shows, if you're the running it, it's hard to make ends meet on this, but he still has the same enthusiasm. And whether I'm working for Tom Loeffler or Oscar De La Hoya or Mr. Thompson and whoever it may be, you have to bring that sense of responsibility to the audience because you're the face of that broadcast. And I think I've been able to stick around for 8 years doing this because people know that when you're going to hear me, I'm going to be over prepared. I'm going to have fun with it. And I'm going to bring you the sense of enthusiasm of sounding like somebody who's there. Now, obviously, a Thompson broadcast is different than doing a traditional TV broadcast on ESPN. And I know my style isn't for everybody. And I don't care because I'm the one that gets to be there, and I know I'm prepared, and I know I'm gonna have fun with it. And if I could do club shows till I'm 80, I'll do it. It's fun. Like, I started off doing high school basketball games 15 years ago. I've covered the Lakers for a lot of years. And if I have a chance to do a high school game now, I'll still do it. They give me like $50. I'm gonna do it. It's okay. You don't have to pay me. I mean, I'll take the money, but for the gas, but it's still fun to do. And I can see myself as somebody who's doing shows wherever they may be, wherever technology is at, late into my life. And it's not because I want to, it's just because I have fun doing it. And I didn't know I wanted to do play-by-play until recently. I was more of like, I'm going to be a traditional TV reporter and just do that stuff. And lo and behold, technology is different. It's crazy. Thompson was one of the first ones that we started streaming the shows, I think 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was, where it wasn't a traditional outlet. So they just said, hey, we'll put it on Facebook and YouTube. And here we are now. Now everybody does it. Now, heck, I've even done shows at the legendary Big Punch Arena on YouTube. So that's all that matters.
There we go. Shout out my man Tim Boxeo, the legend. I mean, the way you broadcast to me, you come off as like the cool uncle. So like we're sitting there and you're like it's basically like a living room experience and you're curating a conversation while the fans interact and you got a guy next to you, maybe former fighter or whoever, big boxing expert, but you're the person that seems like a relative normal person that could be anywhere in any living room helping set the tone and share the passion of the fight.
Yeah, and that's what we try to portray. And for example, the Thompson show, and a lot of credit to goes to Alex Campanovo, the general manager of Thompson Boxing. When we started doing the streams a few years ago, it was myself and Steve Kim. And the reason I even interacted with anybody was because I don't have Facebook. So the shows were on Facebook, and they gave me the comment, like the phone to look at all the comments. And I'm like, damn, you people are mean, right? And we had a fight that was kind of boring, probably a 6 round. I don't remember exactly. So I started reading some of the comments, and I even said it, and they were making fun of the opponent. And I kind of chirped back like, hey, this guy's in the ring at least. What are you doing with your life? And I'm like, damn it, I shouldn't have said that, right? And then they started chirping back and forth, and I, defended myself a little bit. And then it was, whoa, you won't read this comment. So I read it. I mean, the fight was boring. We knew who was going to win. And I read it. They're like, why are you reading our comments? Pay attention to the fight. And I said, you're watching the fight. You can see with your own eyes. I'm hanging out with you guys. What are you guys drinking? Like, it's Friday night, 10 o'clock somewhere. I know you're getting drunk watching this. If you're watching these shows, that's been our line. Is like, hey, if you're watching, you're either related or you're drunk or you can't go to sleep. And of course, the hardcore fight fans are there. So I was kind of like poking at the trolls. And it turned out the trolls were like, dude, you're paying attention to me? Okay, cool. We love you guys. And it wasn't like, oh, man, we love you. And I was also, we didn't know if we were going to continue with the series, like on air. And I was like, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to get a call because Mr. Thompson is super respectful, one of the nicest gentlemen, great businessman. And they're like, hey, we like what you guys did. You interacted with the numbers, and like the metrics showed that the likes and the shares kept going back and forth. They're like, oh, keep doing it. So we just decided to do it. And then Doug Fisher jumped on, and I would do like the roll call. All right, where are you guys watching? And it was like, we started getting a lot of people waking up in Australia in the morning watching boxing, and or soldiers were in the Middle East, or people that were working the graveyard, whatever it was. And it was like, it had somebody interacting with them. And we just kept on going that way. And it was cool. And that was before Tim Boxell really came on the scene with this Twitter and like showing people where you can watch everything around the world. And we just kept on going and interacting with the fans. And that's what we do now. So the Thompson show, we literally interact with the fans all night long. We'll take questions for Doug. It's like, hey, the editor-in-chief of Ring Magazine is here. Like, ask him a question right now. Go for it. Or like if somebody's like, oh, that's my cousin in the ring. I'm like, well, how come you're not here? And they're like, whoa, you're talking to me. And it's like, you're getting that interaction back and forth. And we do that on the Thompson show. That's the only one I do that for. And I'll give you a perfect example. This past weekend, I worked the Golden Boy undercard show alongside with Gabe Rosado. Fantastic. And there was a couple comments in the first two fights about how I'm kind of like loosey-goosey messing around. And somebody was saying like, well, you should be more professional. Or a couple of the comments were like, dude, you're trying too hard to be funny. And I'm like, during my interviews. And it was the interview with Dalis Kaleiopu, young fighter who's from Hawaii.
I know him, the Olympic trials kid.
Exactly.
Maybe a little too skinny for his weight class. Looked a little,
He's 5'11", 132, and hates doing interviews. Good kid from the countryside of Waianae, Hawaii. But I've gotten to know him. And I was like, hey, Dallas, after your win, we're going to interview you. He's like, oh, man. And I'm like, all right, Dallas, you know me, though. Let's have fun with it. We're going to hang around with it. And I was like, I'm asking you about Spam Masubi. I'm asking how much you hate interviews. And he's like, you're going to do that? I'm like, yeah. I was like, we're going to have fun with it. I mean, what are you going to ask a kid who's 2-0? Hey, how do you feel? What's next? Like, come on. Why ask these like real professional boxing questions? Especially when they don't know how to answer and they don't know. They
don't even know who they're fighting next. They're hoping they fight next month.
Exactly. And it's like, they don't. And Dallas, I know we mess around a little bit, and his interview, I thought came out good. And it was like, hey, shout out to everybody and why not this and that. And people are like, you need to be more professional. And so I wrote back to the people on my own YouTube page, like, hey, I'm going to be a certain way with a kid who's 20 than I am going to be with a guy who's 30, a seasoned professional. And this and that. So like I said, I know my style is not for everybody. With the young fighters, I try to be really more relaxed with them because it's intimidating when a guy shows up with a microphone with you and he's wearing a suit. And then as we progress and we build a relationship, like they know how to do things. And I have fun with it. Like, for example, Alexis Rocha, who was the main event on DAZN, the knockout of Blair, Cobbs, I was there for his pro fight, and he was terrified to speak into a microphone. This is back in the Velasco days. And I would tell him, like, hey, man, here's some of the answers. Here's the questions. Here's how you do things. These are some of the cliches, just going. And they're like, okay. And it was like, and then now you see him in the ring interviewed by Chris Mannix. He's like, boom, 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 boom. It's seasoning. It takes a while for it. So back to your question, I just have fun doing it, man. It's really cool. But a broadcast that I'm going to do at 3:00 is way different than the fight we're going to do at 6:00. It progresses, and just have fun with it. And people are like, oh, you're so sensitive what they're saying. I'm like, I'm not sensitive because I'm really secure. I know what's going on, but I try to give people the behind the scenes of how the broadcast works. Because if we just show like, oh, left, right, knockout, ooh, like, come on, man, have fun.
Well, I think the other thing is, as someone that watches a lot of undercard boxing, probably more than the main card, a lot of these fights aren't good. And like, you're looking to see how a young fighter's developing. Can they fight a southpaw? Can they fight power? But a lot of these fights aren't on television for a reason, because they're developmental to get them to that point of becoming entertaining. With Alexis Rocha, I had written down, first off, two-part question, because I'll consolidate everything. Don't understand the difference between Santa Ana and Santana. So explain that one to me as a non-LA resident. Second off, the journey of seeing Alexis, and probably Blair to that extent too, seeing them come up and then kind of having this like apex mountain of their career meeting. What is that journey like when you've been there for so long? So two-parter, not very good interview question, but
no, it's actually pretty good, because I'll post it. So you know this, you're a Bay Area guy, right? Central California.
Yeah, we'll say parts unknown.
Parts unknown. Okay.
I'm north. I'm most of California. So.
Most of California. All right. So, so Alexis is from a city called Santa Ana. 2 words, Santa Ana. About 100,000 people there, predominantly Latino, predominantly Mexican, and people from there take a lot of pride where they're from. But it's also one of those where, the locals always change how a name is said. So you hear the people who are from Santa Ana, and they'll come out with like, oh, it's Santana. They made it one word, just like, Santana, the guitars, right? So they'll smash together Santa Ana into one Santana, right? You say in Spanish, because when you say Santa Ana in Spanish, it's Santa Ana. But when you start speaking Spanish, it's like, oh, vamos a ir a Santana, right? So in Spanish, you kind of make it one word. So the locals take pride in saying Santana. So that's why it's like, it's also kind of like the demographics. Are you from Santa Ana? Or are you from Santana? Like what side of the street are you on?
Are you gentrification, or are you a local?
Yeah, exactly. Are you gentrified and moving in? Because there is some gentrification going on in Santa Ana, but the ones from Santana are like, no, man, let's keep the mom and pop stuff going on here. So it's more of like pride of where you're from. So it's like an inside joke, like a little wink. Are you like, like, for example, San Francisco, you better say San Francisco. People from LA will say, oh, he's from Frisco. Somebody from San Francisco, like, don't say that. I'm not from Frisco, right? So it's kind of things like that. So that's where
I'd say the city. I don't even think anyone in the Bay Area calls San Francisco San Francisco. They'd go, oh, I'm going to the city. And it's like,
the city right there, or from Oakland to town, right? So it's more of like, I'm from here. This is my town, my price. So it's something like that. And it kind of gets something where if I say it, I learned it early on in Alexis' career. I'll say, oh, he's from Santana. Just like a nod to somebody from there. And on the social media, we're like, that's what's up, Beto, respect. You know where he's from, this and that. So that's my little nod to him. But as far as like seeing these kids grow up, it's really cool just to see anybody get to the levels where they're at. For a kid like Alexis, who we know his story, he was a big fat kid playing video games in the corner while Ronnie Rios was training, and then started training to lose weight. And next, he's representing Team USA in Russia, and he's now a main event. To see him bounce back from the loss to Rashidi Ellis and learn and improve. And there's a lot of kids that, we've seen it on the club shows where they're getting built up, they get tested, they lose, and it's like, you never hear from them again. And it sucks to see, but I'm just more happy to see anybody achieving their dream of where they're at or where they want to go, because especially in the boxing world, it's so lonely, right? Everybody's there wearing your shirt when you're 3-0, 4-0. Well, what about when you lose? And Alexis to lose in his hometown when he lost to Rashidi Ellis of Anaheim, right down the street, where are those people at? And it's just, you see the roller coaster ride for a lot of these fighters. And then from Blair, who came out of nowhere because his interesting backstory, and people are like, oh, Blair is this. Yeah, he's 32, but Blair has so much self belief in himself of where he's at and how he had to struggle, how he had to come up, and fighting, and he was very confident. And Blair is gonna be the first one to tell you that a lot of his stuff is an act, like the woo and everything else, the marketing. He's great at it. He knows how to do it. He's parlayed it into being my broadcast partner numerous times. And to see them go back and forth, that was a fight that I was looking forward to, just because I knew it was going to be fireworks. They're going to go back and forth, and it sucks to ever see somebody lose because they're like a step defeated from where they want to be as world champions. But to see the rise of these young men to where they're at, or ladies in some cases, I'm more one of those where I'm just happy to see the best athletes in the world perform at the best level. And, like Jojo Diaz, I knew him when he was trying to be an Olympian. I remember interviewing him for ESPN radio, and then he goes and he gets to this level where he's at. And it's cool to see somebody, whether they're a reporter, a teacher, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is, achieve their goals. And I know I'm sounding like very old man, like, oh, it's cool to see that, but it really is to like, damn, I remember when I was buying you Jack in the Box because you had nothing to eat. And now you're able to afford whatever fancy restaurant you're at. And that's great.
I think that's what keeps me going in boxing, right? Is like, if I only watch the main events, I would watch better sports because there's more competitive fights or more competitive events every week. But it's because I've seen so many different young fighters go through the amateur system, watched them on these undercards, and then they go. And then it's almost like they graduate from me watching them because the world embraces them. And then it's like I find new fighters. And it's like there's something to be said about seeing someone who the sport of boxing, which has this transformative element, unlike any sport I've ever seen, where it's like it creates this discipline that carries over to people's lives and somewhat changes them. And to see that, even if a guy just gets to a world title fight, just the accomplishment from coming from a small town or a rinky dink gym, it really is something special when you see it from the ground up.
Yeah, it's Manny Robles, awesome trainer, is a good friend. When I first got into the boxing world, I announced a couple of his fighters, and I was like, "Hey, Manny, for constructive criticism, what can I do to get better? Like, I don't want to sound like that guy who's a know-it-all but doesn't know anything." He told me, "Come to the gym. Come to the gym this Monday. I'll go through it. I'll tell you the proper terminology." I knew the terms, but just to hear it from a trainer, right? And sat down with him at lunch one day, and he's like, "Es el deporte de los pobres. It's a poor man's sport." And you've always heard it, but then once you're in the gym and you start seeing it, and you're like, this kid really has to succeed because the family's depending on him. Like, he's 5'4". He's not going to play in the NBA. He's not going to play in the NFL. But if this kid gets after it, he has a chance to change his family. He has a chance to change the cycle of where his family's coming from, the demographics, the future generations. And like, damn, the pressure on this kid who's 16, 17 years old, and to see it actually happen, that's awesome. And, there's far too many stories that we've heard, especially in the boxing, where so much wasted potential, or whether they get caught up with girls or the friends or the outside influences. It's like, it sucks to see wasted talent, but then at the same time, you see a fighter like, say, like Abner Mars, Leo Santa Cruz, where they were able to come from and where they're at now, and like, damn, to go become an Olympian or be a champion, and being able to sponsor your own food drives, like, that's awesome to see it. And it's like, I'm not going to be that guy where like, oh no, I knew him first. Like, cause how many people do we know? Like, oh, I knew him first. You weren't there with it. Like, I just want to say, hey, that's cool to see, man. Like, it's really cool. It's like for baseball fans that identify that minor leaguer that was an A-ball, and all of a sudden he becomes, Albert Pujols or Mike Trout, whatever it is, like, it's cool to see the rise of people like that. That's why we love sports, man. It tells the stories.
Well, I think for me, I'm always like, I'm reading a lot of books and I always like the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm always on the young fighters, because I want to start from the beginning and rise to the top.
Mm-hmm.
I also think an immense pressure a lot of these fighters have is there's a lot of father-son relationships, and it's fathers that are big fans of boxing. And then there's like kind of like the prodigal son that they have.
Yep.
And it's a reoccurring theme where it creates these amazing fighters because I feel like they're able to coach at home and in the gym, and they have so much more focus. But what do you think of that relationship? Because I think that oftentimes people are very critical of that, but I think it's almost a necessary evil with the level that we ask of a boxer to get to nowadays.
You ever notice how if you ask a fighter, will they let their kid fight? They always say no, right? They're like, I don't want him to, but if he does, hey, okay. Like Raul Marquez, his youngest son just became a turned pro. But
Geo,
his
right?
older son, I remember talking to Raul because back when I started off doing broadcast, Raul used to do the Showtime shows, and I was there doing the international broadcast. I'm like, hey man, he's like, man, my kids are fighting. I was like, you really want them to? He's like, it's their path. If they do, they do. He's like, but they're around it. You know, I own a gym. They're around it. They're going to do this. And his older son had to retire because of injury. But you always talk to them, the fighter, like, I don't want them to, but if they do, cool. And then you mentioned these father figures, they're trying to live out their dream. They weren't able to do it, but then they're pushing the kid. It's like, hey, do these kids really want to go and run at 5 a.m. when they're 10 years old? I mean, I know it's the discipline of what you got to do, but at the same time, you got to let them be kids, whatever sport it is. Like, you know, we see golf parents out there or baseball parents, and it's like you're grinding them and pushing them. And it's like, at the end of the day, they're not going to be a pro boxer. They're always going to be your son for life. So that's what the impact. And I look at the relationship that JoJo has with his dad, and his dad's in his corner, and JoJo's gone with different trainers and different camps everywhere else, but his dad's always there. But I asked Mr. Diaz a couple of times, why does this work? He said, because when we're in the gym, I'm his coach. When we leave, he goes in his car, I go in my car, we separate, and we just go back to being dad and son. It's very hard to do, but that's what you have to do. And, you know, a lot of the father figures don't want to realize that, hey, it's time for my son to go somewhere else because he's outgrown me. You know, like they don't want anybody else in the corner because they think that they're trying to poach him, or because they think that they're trying to get money, or they're trying to change things out. Like, you know, you have to figure things out of like, what do I want to do to move on? You know, a young fighter that we know, Chimpa Gonzalez, you know, was rising up, knocking people out. And then when he knocked out by Romero Duno, first thing he did was, hey, dad, it was cool, but I got to go somewhere else and train. And he went to Joel Diaz and he left. And I remember having dinner with Mr. Gonzalez, and he's like, hey, let him. That's his decision. It's an athlete. It's a working business relationship. And if you don't, then that's when you're going to have troubles. He goes, do you want troubles in the ring and at home? Then what are you going to do? So, and it's always sad to see when you have those relationships with the father son where you look at them and they're like grown men with grandkids and they don't talk. And you know, it's because it goes back to the resentment that they had as kids. So it's a fine line. I don't know how it is. And I've never been one to give opinions on it. I'm never going to say, hey, you need to stop training your son, because we don't know what really goes on behind the scenes. And we don't know if the son really wants it, or, you know, sometimes also the fighter is the one controlling the shots so much that he doesn't want to hear from somebody else because they might tell them no. So it's an interesting series. And it's having gone and interviewed a bunch of families just in the fighter meetings, you can tell who's the possessive dad and you can tell who's the kid who does the show. It's interesting, man. It's really interesting. But at the end of the day, myself as a father too, it's like, you're going to be the dad forever. You're only going to be a trainer for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think mortality is one of the hardest things to deal with as a man or a woman. And being a coach of any level, you have to understand your limitations. And that's something we see that all the time, right? People with alcohol, limitations are hard. A lot of people, they get going and they don't know it. Parent coach is tricky because I was at the golf course the other day and I was watching someone with a track man, and this kid was hitting every shot great. And they were just like, I was looking at it, I'm like, if this was my experience with golf, I would just quit, because it's like, oh, that was a deviant off. You got to have more of a thing. It's a rough formula. My man, Ruben Torres, you basically called every one of his fights. That must be pretty cool, because it's like, you're almost like, I wouldn't say a family member, but you're in the inner circle to a certain degree.
Yeah, Ruben's a good kid, man. He's gonna be fighting back April 15th on the Thompson. He went and fought for a world title, and you know, Ruben is you know, I got to meet the Garcia family years ago when the first time I went to Salinas and we did a show at the Stormhouse in Salinas. Man, who was fighting? I know Alan Sanchez was the main event on Fox.
Ruben Villa would have been on.
This was before Ruben even was a pro. It was the Stormhouse Salinas. Alan Sanchez was the main
Rudy
event.
Puga, maybe,
but yeah, it was like by 2014, 2015, something like that. But it was cool. And the Garcia family treated us well, myself and Doug Fisher, we were there, and it was great. And it was cool. And that's when I got to see how Salinas comes out for their people. And I was like, man, if there's ever a fighter from here who can actually do something, And then Ruben comes on the scene and is good for him. And he fought for the world title. And, RB4 represents the salad bowl really strong. And, you see a kid go from there to where he's at and fought for a world title, comes up short, but he still fought for it and hasn't fought in a while, but he's going to come back to the DoubleTree in Ontario, get a win and build his career back up. And, that's the part I was talking about, the roller coasters are going up and down. And it's like, you want to root for somebody who just takes ownership in his family and takes ownership in what he's doing in his career. And is like, okay, what's next for us? And you wish him the best. And like, you're not there as a reporter, you're not there cheerleading, but you're as a human, you're like, heck yeah, let's go do something.
The Danny Zamora crew that's part of Thompson Boxing. Give me that. That would be Dutch over, Ruben Torres, all of them.
Dutch over, Ruben Torres that he has. I saw Ruben Torres as a kid, loves boxing. He was at the the Blair Cobbs Rocha fight on Saturday. I saw him there with his family. This kid is nice. He's probably got one more fight at the ballroom before it's a show box or a bigger card or wherever it may be. He's really good, disciplined. And this goes back to the family angle. Ruben as an amateur was boxing, gets to high school, is like, I'm burnt out of boxing. I want to go play football. His dad said, go play football. Ruben goes to San Francisco State for 1 year, comes home for the summer, starts boxing just to stay in shape. Damn, I missed this. Hey, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something there. And he now has that desire and that work ethic that maybe he wouldn't have had if he had been boxing nonstop since he was 8 years old. And he's very, very talented, a lot of potential, works hard, fights on a Friday. He's back in the gym on a Monday, doing the conditioning, stuff like that. I really like him. Great personality, good kid. Ace Torres. He's outgrown the DoubleTree shows, and he outgrew him a year ago, but COVID, I think, delayed some of that. And then Michael Dutchover, also a fighter from Midland, Texas, with Danny Zamora, Ruben stablemate. And, he had a loss on his record and has to come back and turn things around. And he's doing that. He's back in the gym. He's going to be fighting pretty soon. So kids like there where they didn't get signed to the big promoter like Golden Boy or Top Rank or PBC, but they're grinding their way through the ranks. And, I think you start seeing some of those kids who are there like, man, I'm on the same level as those guys. But at 18, they didn't have the strength, or they didn't have the tools that the big pedigree kids have. And then it's really simple to see them pass some people up.
My man Bruno Escalante, the Aloha kid, he always tells me a story about talking with you about the Hawaiian Pitbull, Arnold Dinong. Do you remember any bit of this story?
Yeah. So Dinong is a Hawaiian kid, and I remember Aloha Boxing, right?
Aloha time.
Aloha. I think I met him. I met him at the Stormhouse in Salinas, Dinong. And I'm asking him, I'm like, dude, so what's up? You gonna move to California? He's like, yeah, I gotta move here. And like the Hawaiian fighters, like you mentioned, Dalis, Kaleiopu also. And it's like they outgrow the island because they need to get better sparring, they need to get better work, and they know they got to leave. And I always tell them, like, Dino, like, respect to you, man. Like, it's hard to leave your comfort zone, especially at that age, and then to chase it. And then you're the best man on the island. Then you get to wherever gym you're at, and you're like, damn, I got to start all over. That's an ego check right there. But then you got to work your way up because, I mean, everybody says they want to be a world champ, but you're going to have to get tested eventually. And I always say it's better to get tested early on, suffer that loss early on or whatever it is. And yeah, you can have, 18 fights and you can knock everybody out in 15 seconds, but for what? That's cool for Instagram. What are you going to do when you actually get pushed? And you're like, damn, it's only the 6th round. We're going 10, we're going 12. Like, and that's what the club shows do. They force you to fight your way out of there because, I've had this conversation with Alex from Thompson is we can't match you easy early on because we have an investment in you and we can't afford to baby you the way that if we had the Top Rank or the Golden Boy budget, because we can't afford it. We're low level budget wise. So there's certain guys that they could treat a little bit better, but hey, if we didn't sign you and you're only 3-0, well, you're going to fight a guy who's 3-0. Like, come on. If you're an Olympian, are you fighting somebody else who's dangerous? Heck no. You're not fighting that Mexican who's 5-8 with 3 draws. And all of a sudden you're like, damn, how'd this happen?
Yeah. I mean, it's a cold game. Give me some social observations on Ryan Garcia over the years.
Like Ryan's cool, man. He's always been nice to me. But I remember meeting Ryan before he was signed to Golden Boy. He used to go to the Blasco shows and he would be there. I think he was like 17, 18 years old. And he was like, oh, I'm fighting in Mexico. All right, cool. And Ryan did a great job of realizing that at his age how to use social media to his advantage, and he's great at it, and he's really good. And he doesn't have to box because he's making a bunch of money with the Fashion Nova or whatever those other brands are that me as a guy in his 40s has no clue what they are, right? But he has an audience that's there for him. Ryan is talented. Ryan works. And we talk about kids who didn't have that traditional upbringing as a kid where you go play. No, Ryan was in tournaments all over the country along with his dad. And, they're going and figuring things out, trying to figure out what's going on. And, talk about the pressure, like the family there. Ryan's the one who got the family out of Victorville. I don't even know where they live now, but he got in the house, he's doing everything else. And, that's a lot of pressure on somebody that young, because if you're a traditional person, you go to your college, you go wherever you may be, you're bouncing around from job at 22, 23, whatever it is you might do. You're not settling down to you in your 30s, maybe. Yet we're asking these 22-year-olds to be super responsible and do this and that. It's hard to ask whether you're playing football, baseball, basketball. But at the same time, I've always said it, the day you become a professional is the day you have to act professional. You are no longer an 18-year-old who can go to the bar with a fake ID. No, you're going to be looked at somewhere else. Like, you have responsibilities. You sign a contract. You have the money coming your way. And like I have a lot of guys who cover different sports, and we talk to them, and it's like, damn, you're so mature. But a lot of these baseball players, they sign out of high school and they're living in the minor leagues. They're able to fail in places that nobody's watching them. So when they get to the big leagues, they're seasoned. Nowadays, with social media for young fighters, at the age of 10, do you really need a logo? Do you need a big social media following? You're going to this tournament and you're posting that you won this, you won that. Like, the kid's not using the account. The parents are using the account. Like, what are you doing? Like, let the kids be kids. I always say that. I know I sound like an old man now, but let them be kids and let them figure out what they want to do. But Ryan is a guy who realized that if you hate him, you're going to watch him. Back to that Mayweather, right? When he was Pretty Boy Floyd, he was there. He became Money Floyd and became the heel and learning how to do things. Everybody started watching to see him lose. And Ryan knows that. Ryan plays the social media game very, very well. But there's no doubt that when Ryan gets to the gym, he does the work, man. You see the results. And a lot of talent still needs to be tested a little bit more, but a lot of talent definitely there.
Someone sent me a text message, so I rudely just looked at that instead of unmuting myself. Ryan, to me, when I went to Victorville, it was like when I went to New York and I understood why like New York rap all sounded the same and was boring to me. It's like Victorville is so far away. It made sense that someone could be good at using social media because you can't just go around and interact with people just from the sheer, if you want to experience the world in Victorville, it seems like these apps are a great tool to do it. And if you really do it, you could actually become a master of it because there's a lot of isolation there.
Yeah, especially as a fighter, right? Because if you're in camp, what are you doing? You're on your phone all day long, right? It's like, hey, tomorrow we're going to get up, we're going to run at 5:00. Well, you're in your room at 8:00, making sure you can't go nowhere. So like Ryan capitalized on it and he's great at it. But at the end of the day, boxing fans, they love you in the beginning. Okay, cool. But then it's like, hey, you got to perform. Like, you can't call out the big names and then not fight them. So how Ryan could get some validation, not that he cares or needs it from the fight fans, is to fight the names that he's been calling out. And until then, he's going to get the criticism. But Ryan also knows that he's going to get the criticism. He doesn't care. As long as you watch the fights, that's what matters.
That's a good point. Give me a good story over the years in the boxing biz from calling a fight.
From calling a fight. We were doing a fight at Fancy Springs, myself and Doug Fisher, and a fighter got hit so hard that he went through the ropes right above us. And I'm here and the guy's coming at me and I see him, and you're not allowed to touch the fighters because if you help the fighter get up, he's disqualified. But this dude got cracked so hard. I'm like, oh, he's out. He was out as he went through the ropes. And I literally held him up. If not, he's going to slam onto our table like a wrestling move. And
like he's coming through the Spanish broadcast booth.
Yeah, through the Spanish broadcast booth. That's what's going to be. No, it's like the dude fell down and I caught him in the middle of the action. And I got the video somewhere. I don't know where it's at, but I got the video. The guy's falling through and I'm like, here he comes. And the thing that was dangerous, because I always have a pen in my hand, just as a habit. At that time, I didn't, because if I would have had the pen, that would like stabbed him a little bit, like you just don't know what might happen. But that was one cool story. But I always go back to my first fight. It was an audition with Golden Boy. So this was in 2013. And back at that time, Golden Boy had just launched the series on Fox, and they were using Barry Tompkins, the legendary, awesome, fantastic, one of the nicest persons I've ever been in the business, Barry Tompkins. As we know, Barry Tompkins, this was like 8-9 years ago. He has conflicts because he does college football, does college basketball, and then if you're traveling in the winter, you never know. There might be a snowstorm that he gets caught. And Barry doesn't need fighter meetings. Barry doesn't do it. He comes in so well prepared. He's the epitome of class professionalism. But they were looking for somebody to have as a backup just in case a snowstorm would hit, or is Barry going to go to the Stormhouse in Salinas for a guy who's 3-0, or is Barry going to call the Pac-12 championship? Like nothing against Salinas and the Stormhouse, but the Pac-12 championship or college basketball might be a little bit of a bigger step. So anyways, they told me, like, hey, do you know anybody who we could use for broadcast as a backup? I'm like, no, we don't, because this is 2013. Nobody was streaming yet. So not like there's a bunch of minor league boxing announcers like you do for football or baseball, right? And then they're like, well, if you think of anybody. So I thought of some of my friends who do play-by-play, and I'm like, hey, you guys interested in doing some boxing? Maybe. And they're like, no. Because, boxing, you got to either know it or you don't. And then they told me, well, what about you? I'm like, I've only done high school games, like for football and basketball. They're like, well, we're looking for people if you want to throw your name in the hat. And I'm like, you know what do I got to lose? So I put together an audition tape. I went on YouTube, put a couple fights together, and I did a broadcast, and I put together like a 3-minute reel, and I sent it in, and they're like, hey, we like it. Cool. A couple of months go by, and they're like, hey, we actually got a problem. The international broadcast that we use isn't available this weekend. Can you get to New York in 2 days? I'm like, yeah, no problem. I'm ready. And so I had told the people later on, I'm like, yeah, I've been doing some other fights. I hadn't, right? And then they're like, it's the international
like a true
broadcast.
veteran.
Yeah, what are you gonna do, right? So the international broadcast, which means they hear you everywhere except the United States, and you're not on camera. So I'm like, hell yeah. So I went, and I did. It was the Zab Judah Paulie Bonalaji fight at the December of 2013 at the Barclays Center.
Battle of Brooklyn.
And I walked in there, and I was like, whoa, this is cool. Just the fact you get to the hotel, there's the packet there waiting for you, your credential. And I'm like, man, like I've done some cool stuff in my career. I'm like, this is great. I'm like, so nobody hears me because it's just the international broadcast. There's no streaming. So there really wasn't any pressure. And I did it. And it was Sakio Bika was on the card. Devin Alexander was on the card. It was December 2013. So it was cool to see it, and just going to the venue with these fighters. I was like, this is awesome. So walked in there, did it, overly prepared, had a bunch of information. It was fun to do. And I thought I would never get another call again. If I were to hear it right now, I would cringe. I probably said something cheesy. Austin Trout was on the card, and I remember saying something about like, oh, he was on Say Yes to the Dress, and I'm like, why did I say that? Stupid things. And they're like, hey, we liked it. We have a fight in February. You want to do another one? And I'm like, oh, snap. Okay, yeah. And they're like, and then from there, it was, I was like doing a couple international front for them, and it was just the backup. And then sure enough, Barry Tompkins had a conflict one time, and they're like, hey, can you get to Boston on St. Patrick's Day? And I'm like, sure. So I did the St. Patrick's Day in Boston alongside Paulie Malignaggi, St. Patrick's Day 2014. And that was my intro into boxing. And then I would do some shows on Fox. So whenever Barry Tompkins had a conflict, I was able to get some stuff in there. So Brian Custer also came out of that. So we were backups. It was cool. It was a lot of fun. And I always go back to that first one of like sitting there at Barclays Center ringside. Like I've been to a lot of fights as a fan, also a member of the media, but I'd never been ringside. And when you're sitting there ringside, you're like, holy smokes, like, damn, this is cool. Like working basketball, I'm not on the floor. Baseball, I'm not behind home plate. This was absolutely cool just to see it. And I still have that same energy now than I did back then.
One thing that stands out to me that's pretty cool is that you've progressed so much. I think of all the people that if they listen to themselves in 2012, it might sound the same as 2022. I think it's a good thing when you look at your work and you go, oh man, because you're growing. Final question. What's the bucket list golf course that you got on your
Mount Rushmore? So yeah, I started hacking a couple years ago just to mess around. And I always say I was never going to take it serious. This year I decided to take it serious by keeping score. I still don't take it serious. I still mess around. I have my cigar, my smokes, I'm ready to go. But bucket list, I like Augusta, but I'm not too happy about it. Like, like because I know I'm going to get to Augusta. I'm going to play it just the way I am. Pebble Beach I'm going to play it. I've done the 19-mile drive and it's awesome. It's great, but I want to go play St. Andrews. I want to go where golf started and see what's at. And I want to take a picture on that bridge and actually legit want to play there. Like that one, I'll probably pay to play because I rarely pay to play because I'm like, that's why I stay at the municipal courses where I know somebody. I'm like, okay, yeah. Like the nice courses I don't go to because you got to pay. I ain't trying to pay $150. Forget that. But St. Andrews, I really want to go. You're a golfer?
Yeah, I play a little bit. I'm going to Pinehurst pretty soon this
Oh,
summer.
my
I was
man.
actually just looking up St. Andrews. What's the line you'd take on the road hole? What would your start line be? Would you go over the street or would you go straight?
Oh, you gotta go straight, man.
Got to go over the road.
Gotta go. Gotta
Got to
go.
go over that corner where you know what I'm talking about, where the street and the hotel.
You
Yeah,
go right at it, man. You do not lay up. You go after that beast.
feel like at St. Andrews, if anyone plays that for like a Zach Johnson, real boring, like, oh man, I'm gonna think through the course. Like you're just basically that's not the way you're supposed to do it. You're
No.
supposed to go there and get a little worked. The last great course, well, I play a lot of good courses, but I played Tethrow and I got a hole in one there.
Whoa.
And I remember everyone was like, "Oh man, you're gonna hate it," and it was like playing pinball, right? So the modern golfer wants a 115-foot apex ball that stops and they can control every single thing. They want to be JT. And there's something nice about my 60 to 80-foot ball flight that just runs. And you have to, like non-like life, you have to accept your limitations. And I think link style golf, what frustrates people is the wind blows and there's nothing fair about it. But for
Yeah.
the average golfer, that's actually nice because bad shots turn into good shots.
Yeah.
What sucks for the pros is they control every element. So they're hitting good shots and then having a worse shot coming in, like 18 St. Andrews, that Valley of Sin. You spin it back and you got but that's my golf rant.
Yeah. It's anytime people say, oh, the pros would have done this, pros would have done that. I'm like, good. That's why they're pros. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna go hack and I'm gonna have fun with it because I'm never come back to St. Andrew, so I'm gonna go after everything. Like forget that. So that's my approach to things. People are like, oh, you should do this. I'm like, how about you should shut up because I'm gonna go and I'm gonna try this right now. So that's what I'm gonna do.
Well, every Christmas I try to play Spyglass, and it's like every year
Nice.
you just try to cut into that score, but it's like Spyglass is one of these cores where people play Pebble to see the beautiful stuff. People play Spyglass to get kicked in the balls. And it's like every time you try to play it, even if you think through it, it's just such a demanding course. I don't think you can truly think through the course. I mean, we're looking at a course where the pros on some given days shoot 4 under, albeit they're tipping it
Yeah.
out. But that's all relative because it's just shot making. I say all that to say, I don't really think thinking through a golf course unless you do it every day and control every element
Yeah.
and understand playing. I think honestly, just swinging a club and being an athlete over the ball is the best routine for most people.
I just want to go have fun, man. And that's why when people ask me, so on my Instagram, the Beto Vision, I always post like when I'm playing golf and people are like, oh man, what's your handicap? I'm like, dude, if you're asking me for my handicap, I don't want to play with you. If you're asking me for this, I don't want to play. I don't play weekends because I work weekends. I keep score just for myself, just to know where I'm improving, but I only keep score at the certain courses where I know I'm play regularly. So like that way I know where I'm improving. Like I want to get better so I can get invited with my good friends to the fancy tournaments.
Go
Like
to Cypress
that's the reason I
Point and
want to get better.
stuff, little Pine Valley action.
Well, for example, like Oscar Deloya asked me the other day at the press conference. He's like, "Hey, you've been playing a lot." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you shooting now?" I was like, "Oh, the 90s." He's like, "Oh, okay." And that was it. That was the end of the conversation, right? Because
Pretty sick.
because Oscar's in the 70s, so he's not going to invite me to play. So in the past, he'd be, oh, we should play it. I'm like, I'm not that good, Oscar. And he's like, oh, yeah. I'm telling, he's like, yeah, you got to be in the 70s to come play with me, which he is, and it's like, I'm not going to waste your time. So like, I want to get better so I can go with those groups. Like, but for myself, but like when normal people are like, oh, what's your handicap? Or what are you doing this? And I'm like, dude, like if you're a guy that takes it serious, don't, if you're yelling and cursing, that's not me, man. I'm like, I take my drink, take my cigar, I go for a good walk, and that's it. That's what I do.
If I come down there and it's a weekday, If I
Let's
go see
go.
my man ABJ, Arnold Barbosa with the iced out chain in El Monte, if I go down there and see him with his chain sparkling so brightly like a star in the sky, maybe I'll take you down to Goat Hill Park because I've been wanting to
Yeah,
play Goat Hill Park a lot because
I'll do
I've been
that.
thinking about Torrey Pines, but I don't want to have to like big dog it out and be swinging as hard as I can
Torrey was
all.
hard. I
I
played
mean, it's
Torrey
just
before the
driving
US
range
Open. It's
golf.
hard.
It's
Yeah.
just swinging as hard as I can. It's like going to the range where I drink beer and just swing and I think Torrey Pines is all about ball position. It's where you
Yes.
put the ball in your stance, swinging down, swinging through your heels, making sure I get my right pocket through the ball, hip in, right. It's just you're bored, I'm bored. It's not engaging. It's just me swinging hard, thinking about it. It doesn't sound fun to me.
At all, man. At all. Yeah. There's no need for that. No
Okay,
need for
well,
that stress in your life.
yeah, I feel like all my life is stress, but I like talking to Beto because Beto doesn't bring stress. Maybe one day you'll see how terrible I am at golf and all that, and you can put it on your story or something. But Goat Hill Park, Beto, where can people follow you if they've bothered to get
Social
through?
media, Instagram is Bethel Vision. That's fun. Twitter, Duran Sports. That's professional. YouTube is Beto Duran. I do a YouTube show on Thursdays with Joel Diaz and Roberto Diaz called Thursday Diaz, where we just talk boxing, and it's not a breakdown of fights. It's just tell stories. And if you know Coach Diaz, he's got story for days, and Roberto Diaz telling stories about matchmaking and stuff that they've had all over the world. So it's just a lot of fun for the boxer. I know there's a bunch of boxing podcasts out there, but that one is just like listening to your uncles in the backyard tell boxing stories. So it's cool.
Glad you said that because I'm starting to wonder if there's even a need for me to do this anymore. If I can just listen to other people, because it's like it's getting to a point where like every person that I grew up watching has a podcast. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like maybe it's that point where I can just venture into just sheer capitalism and like I don't have to be because I basically jumped into this out of sheer boredom. Maybe Eric Morales and some of these other guys can grab the bull by the horn and do in-depth interviews every week. I'm still waiting for that moment.
Yeah. No, you keep doing it, man. You give light to a lot of people. So keep doing it.
Thank you, Beto. I appreciate that. But I'm sure matchmakers have no stories to tell at all because it's just the easiest job in boxing. But I appreciate you just coming on here and talking to little old me.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Glad we did this.